So I'm just starting the broadcast. Okay. All right. We're on YouTube now. I'm going to begin the recording on Zoom. And just hold on a second.
How many people are here?
Not very many. This is kind of like an academic thing. So we're sharing now, right? Okay.
Okay.
Hello, we are honored and happy to be here with Peter Kuper. Okay? Peter Kuper, from a comic book artist and illustrator from the United States. He was born in Summit in New Jersey, okay, and he spent some time there, and then he moved to Cleveland, Ohio, right? And he spent most of his childhood in Ohio, right? And it was there that he published his first fanzine called Precisely Fanzine. He attended in Cleveland, okay, Kent State University before moving to New York in the 70s. And there in New York, he continued his studies in such centers as the Art Students League and the Pratt Institute. He's the author of many comic books and graphic novels, such as Diario de Oaxaca, Drawn to New York, comic strips, The System, and he has also adapted the works of some literary authors into comics, such as Kafka and Joseph Conrad. He's also the founder of World War III, a comics political magazine, and in his extensive career, he has done many things. He's also an illustrator, and we will see some of the covers he has done for such magazines as Time, Newsweek, The Progressive. Okay, Peter Kuper has received numerous awards, and he currently lives in New York City, a city that, in spite of everything, he still loves. Right? So. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
And we would like to talk a little bit about your life and work, okay? Starting from your birth, okay, in Summit, right, New Jersey. You spent there some years of your life, okay, before moving on, okay, and like starting to live in Cleveland, Ohio, right? Okay, right. We must say that Peter can speak Spanish too, right? Okay, and we will talk. We will have some conversation in Spanish, right? in this in this interview, right? Probably his Spanish is better than my English.
No, no se vale.
All right. So Cleveland, right? You lived there until you were like 18, 19 years old?
18.
Okay, right. Now my first question is, how and when did you discover comics?
When I was 7, I saw Jack Kirby's and Stan Lee's Thor, and it completely rocked my world. And I wanted to be an entomologist before that. I wanted to study insects.
Right, really?
And then yes, that was my first love. And but then when I saw this comic in a rack of a beautiful rack of comics that if I only had bought all of them and kept them in mint condition, I'd be a rich man today. And it just it spoke to me, and I was very much in shock because at the end of the story, Thor is killed, and I think that's the end of the comic. And then discover, wait, he came back the next issue, which was a great relief. And that was pretty much every comic I read by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby at the time. But there's many other factors that came in, and I'll talk about them a little bit in my presentation.
Mm-hmm.
I can show you some images that will go along with that. So very early on, I got interested in comics, and I had the good fortune to have a friend who was also interested in comics, so I wasn't alone.
All right, correct. Okay. And you went on to study at Kent State University, right? Okay.
For just a year.
Okay.
It was a dark year for me.
It was a dark year. You didn't like the university life, or
no, I realized that in the regular world, which Kent State was kind of like high school, college. It was lots of people who are interested in sports, and I realized in the regular world that I was a hostage, that I was not going to do very well, talking about sports, which I had no interest in, and the things that most people wanted to talk about. I was interested in comics and politics. Right when I was there was a whole issue about them building a gymnasium on top of the site of the shooting at Kent State. I was there in 76. The shooting happened in 70. And so it was still pretty fresh, but the school wanted to completely erase that history. And I went out, the anniversary of the shooting, I went out with a group of people, and there was actually a tent city. And there's a movie called Born on the 4th of July that has Tom Cruise playing a guy named Ron Kovic. Well, Ron Kovic was there, and I hung out with him. He was in a wheelchair, and he was protesting, and there was about 4 other people. So the school wasn't interested in that. The students weren't interested in that, and I realized that it was like going back to the worst kind of high school for me, like my old gym class, and I felt depressed, and I wanted to get to New York as quickly as possible. And on my spring break, I visited New York with my sketchbook, and I went around to animation houses to ask about getting any kind of work. And one of the animation houses said, "Yeah, we were working on a movie and we'll give you work." And I moved to New York for this job that summer in 1977. And that was a time in New York when it was like, if you saw the movie Taxi Driver, that was it was a documentary on how New York was. It was really dangerous, really dirty. It was Times Square had prostitution and kung fu movies with Bruce Lee, and I loved it. I was so happy. It was very threatening, and it was like exactly what I wanted. But I had a healthy respect for New York because I saw the movie Taxi Driver right before I left, and I thought, okay, it's crazy here. And I had actually been visiting New York to go to comic conventions because I happily, along with my friend Seth DeBachman from Cleveland, we connected with a world of comic fandom very early on, doing a fanzine and all. And so every year, my year was devoted to passing my courses, because then my parents would allow me to go to New York and go to the comic convention. And that was like the conventions at that time. My first one was in 1970 in Detroit. And the guests were Jim Stranko and Bernie Wrightson, the early comics people. And the one in New York was like, all the people from Mad Magazine. Sergio Aragonés was there. Will Eisner was there. We got to meet Harvey Kurtzman, and it was all guys. There were no women. There was maybe one woman there, and nobody, no young women at all. Fortunately, I hadn't hit puberty, so that didn't matter as much to me. But it was just completely in an environment, it was kind of the comic nerd scene, but it also showed me what it was like, what people who did this for a living, what it was like. Got to be around artists, and I thought, wow, you can grow up, be an adult, and yet keep playing. So that's what I wanted when I moved to New York, and I got offered this job in animation. So I arrived in New York when I was 18, and I went to the animation place, and the animation industry was in a downturn. And he said, "Sorry, we finished the movie." He couldn't remember even who I was, and I never got a job in animation. But I was in New York, and so I was like, "Well, I guess I'll stay." And but I was very, very unequipped. And very early on, I went to a comic convention in that first summer, and I bumped into one of the old fan artists that I met who had become a professional, a guy named Howard Chaikin. And Howard Chaikin worked in a studio, and because he had met me when I was really a kid, like when I was 11 or 12, he said, I was now in New York. He said, "I need an assistant. You want to be my assistant?" And I was like, "Okay." So I came and I started working in the studio with really almost no skills. My skill was that I loved comics. Okay. And he was a pretty hard slave driving boss, but which kept me scared and working very hard. But it was like just what I needed to like get rolling really fast. And in the studio was also Walt Simonson, and later Frank Miller came in.
Right.
Maybe my second year there. He was doing Daredevil at the time. And so I was being exposed to all these comics and all this information. And Howard Chaikin was also interested in illustration. So part of my job was to file and learn about the artist so that I could help him in his work. I worked on The Stars My Destination was the graphic novel he was doing at the time. And then later, Swords of Heaven, Flowers of Hell, written by Michael Moorcock, that was published, I believe, by Heavy Metal. And so I got to be around all that. But at the same time, I was seeing what I wasn't interested in, because there was aspects of the mainstream comics that just didn't interest me. And I started finding more interest in artists outside of comics. I was interested in German Expressionism. I was interested in cartooning, like from the New Yorker, and also Saul Steinberg, and just a wider range. And I very quickly realized I just did not have the skills to do this as a living, and I realized I need to go back to school. So I was living in Brooklyn, and I went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, but also I was in a work study. So I was working for Howard Chaikin and being in school, and I just juggled that. I also very early on started to, I got work as an inker for Harvey Comics. So I was juggling a little bit of everything. And if you want, I'll go to my presentation and I can show you some visuals from this.
Yeah. I can't leave this presentation, and you're gonna start yours, But I'm quite impressed by what you have said, like going from Kent State University, right, to New York was a complete change for you, meeting all these wonderful people. And I'm especially interested, in the fact that you met all these artists from Mad magazine in the late 1870s already.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
For my fanzine, one of the things that we got to do, my friend Seth and I, we'd come to New York, and for our fanzine, we'd interview the artists. So we interviewed Jack Kirby for our fanzine. We interviewed Bill Gaines, for the publisher of Mad. Interviewed Neil Adams. We interviewed the inker Joe Sinnott. That was one of the first interviews. We also interviewed Robert Crumb. That we had. I met Harvey Pekar in Cleveland, who he worked in a hospital.
You met everybody.
Well, the thing about comics, especially at that time, was that it was so much in the infancy of the form that you could connect with people, and they weren't, the fact that I was a child didn't stop them from talking to me.
Right.
Maybe now that would be a little more difficult. I don't know. I mean, actually, probably not. I've been interviewed by young people as well. I wouldn't say no. But at the time, it was really, the fandom was so small. It was a few thousand people at a big convention that you could just walk up to somebody and say, could I interview you? And they'd say, sure. We'd go off to a corner. I had my little microphone and tape recorder, and they would sometimes give a very honest, interesting interview. And these were like heroes, and I got to see them up close because I had the reason of, because we were publishing this fanzine, which was a very real reason. And then we would go home and we would edit the interviews and all. And we interviewed Robert Crumb. We got the interview through Harvey Pekar. And Seth and I wrote up the questions. We typed them up and gave him, which was a very legitimate response.
I'm especially interested, in you meeting Sergio Aragonés, because I even wrote an article about Sergio Aragonés, who was born in Spain and then he moved to Mexico, and then later on he went on to live in New York, right? Okay. And so you've known Sergio Aragonés for decades.
Yeah, since I was, I met him. I got my first sketch from him when I was 12.
Right.
I still have it too, by the way.
Right.
And he especially completely knocked me out because he would do a cartoon for you on the spot, and it was like a new idea, like you had never seen it before. And then he walked over. There was a big blackboard, like a chalkboard, at the convention. Just for the fun of it, he drew the scene of the convention with hundreds of people, and I just, you'd walk by and he just would be standing there drawing, and it was clear that he just loved what he did, and that just opened my eyes to that whole concept of play at work, and that he did this for fun, and I just thought, like, this is my dream. When we interviewed Jack Kirby, he said to me, at age 13 or 14, he said, I'm sure, if you drew the city, you draw it very well if you lived in New York. I didn't draw barely at all. But the idea that Jack Kirby is suggesting that one day I might be able to draw New York City just made my heart sing.
It was great, yeah.
As if we were talking as, peers or something. So.
Right, correct. Sergio Aragonés, somebody called him the fastest comic and
draw in the West.
Right.
Yes, he is. He's completely that. No, yeah. He's a little miracle of being able to, and also just ideas are just pouring out of him. Because of circumstances where I now have been working for Mad Magazine for 25 years. He and I have become, more, I get to hang out with him and go to dinner with him. And that's another one of those dreams come true because we can speak about these now as, I don't want peers sounds, I think of him above me always, but as colleagues.
Right. So whenever you want, you can go ahead and show your presentation.
I'll do a screen share here, and
okay.
I'll share my show. So I'm going to start with my earliest work. Mm-hmm. That would be age 4. My mom. So there's me. That's me in the front row. That's my friend Seth in the back row in first grade. So that's how far back Seth Tabachman, a cartoonist, and I go. So another important thing was there was a movie called Failsafe, and in the movie Failsafe, it's a movie from the early 60s, and there's a accidental bombing. The United States accidentally bombs Russia, and to stop World War III, the United States allows Russia to bomb one city, and the city that they bomb is New York, which is where I want to move. And seeing this when I was 8 years old, it set something in motion where realizing that there was something, this thing, the atomic bomb, that could destroy the entire planet in one go, that this existed, stayed with me from that moment. It actually had a weirdly positive effect, because then I would always, and I still do, kind of like, well, I got to get this book done before they drop the bomb. I have to do this. I better, tell my daughter I love her before they drop the bomb. It's a very positive motivator for me. Another important thing is that my father was a professor, and he got a sabbatical when in 1969, and they bought a VW van, and we drove across Europe, my family camping, and went to Israel. And we had a year living in Israel. So when I was 10, I had my first experience living outside the United States and understanding that the world was not Cleveland, Ohio. Another important influence for me was Mad Magazine, as we've already talked about. And it was so important to my own evolution and bringing me where I am today, so that I understand that humor and politics can come together in our evolution. And one of the strange changes of event was that I was asked to do Spy versus Spy back in 1996. And I almost said no, because I'm an idiot, and which made me perfect for Mad Magazine. But also I was doing my own thing, and I thought Spy versus Spy was created by Antonio Proquies, a Cuban artist, back in 1961. And these aren't my characters, but I've been very interested in wordless comics always. And this was one of the ultimate in comics without words. And so I thought I'd give it a try. And it's been 25 years now. So I mentioned I was working for Harvey. I became an inker on Richie Rich. Kind of ironic for a political left-wing cartoonist. But this did come in handy later when I wanted to do some parodies like this one of George Bush. So this is George Bush as Little Richie Bush. So growing up in the 70s, this is the kind of image that you'd see. And I wanted to do happy art. It's just that there were circumstances like the Vietnam War that were teaching me that there was more going on than behind that happy face. Another thing that came up was Ronald Reagan. I know it's kind of hard to see his face here. This is one of my little portraits of him. So Ronald Reagan was coming into office in the late 70s. In 1980, he was elected. And this is exactly when I was in art school with, as it happened, my friend Seth Bachman. We grew up together from first grade. Then we moved to New York together. Then we ended up in the same art school. And we both were interested in comics still. But in 1979, there was really, the underground comics had pretty much died because they had closed down the means of distribution, which was the shops that also sold bongs and blacklight posters. And so but having done a fanzine, we realized we were capable of publishing. So we were doing comics, but we also saw work by other people that we wanted to include. And very quickly, other people joined us in this process. And year after year, we just kept on finding new people who wanted to join doing it, and really lots and lots of subjects to talk about, unfortunately. And we are now in our 41st year of publication. Just came out with a new issue in September. The secret to our success is nobody has made any money. It's not exactly a business model, but that every band breaks up because they have to fight over something. As soon as we get $25, we start fighting over it. Nobody gets any money. As editor, it just means I get to work harder and be hated more. But this was an opportunity to do work and talk about things that were going on, and to make sure that people knew that a different perspective than you saw in the mainstream. In September 11th, 11 de septiembre, es un muy importante punto en nuestras vidas que estamos en la ciudad, entonces es posible para ver directamente nuestra experiencia. Es una directamente experiencia, pero hay censura en periódicos, revistas, pero en nuestra propia revista, Tercera Guerra Mundial Ilustrada, podemos platicar sobre qué pasa en nuestra experiencia contra el movimiento de la dirección de immediatamente de guerra con quién, con Irak o Afghanistan, ¿por qué exactamente? This was the cover of the issue before we went into Iraq. So nobody likes, and I told you so, but we've been talking about what we thought we saw coming in American politics before things were happening. We saw this as a possible new Vietnam. It's worse than that, of course. We've been in these wars longer than in the history of all our wars. So I tried to bring what I was doing with World War III into my work. I did a lot of illustration work that was not very interesting, and I'm not going to show you that because it bores me. But I did at a certain point decide I was going to stop taking work that didn't have social political context to it. So I started turning down work that wasn't about something. And at first I didn't get work, but then when I did get the jobs, I found I was getting the work that mattered to me. And I could come up with 100 ideas for things about these world situations that if it was just a dumb job about computers and business, I could not come up with an idea. And so then I started getting the kind of work I wanted more. And I was a whole set of circumstances, my abilities to work under a deadline, which in the case of a Time magazine cover, you have to do it the same day. So I might get it called at 12 and it's due by 6 p.m. And often I was racing down to get it there to make the deadline. So this is all very, very quick. And it was, I went through a long period of doing this kind of work and felt very fortunate. I had not done comics. I was experimenting with stencils and spray paint, but I had not done comics in this format until I got the opportunity to do an adaptation with Classics Illustrated. And I held up one drawing and I said, I'd like to do the whole comic like this. And the editor was like, okay. So I brought that sensibility into the comics. These are all done cutting stencils and with spray cans and then watercolor on top of it. And I also wanted to bring in the influence of the illustration, the influence of the German expressionism, Russian constructivism, all the different things I felt were possible in comics. And comics being a form that is it's so young in many ways that there was so many different aspects of art that were not being represented in comics that just by even using stencils and spray paint, I was doing something that was fairly new. So to come back, this travel experience that I had with my parents led me to travel myself. And it was very important to me to take a break periodically and go traveling. I decided in 1984 to stop working and go for a 2-month trip through Europe. I wasn't exactly sure why I was going. And then when I got to Madrid on this trip, I was staying in a pension across from the Prado, and I met my wife. She was staying in the same pension, the woman who became my wife in 1984, and we're happily still married and have a child together.
Hold on a second. You met your wife in Madrid?
I did. She was American. We were both traveling. We hadn't spoken to anybody in English for about a week. I was very desperate. I was also had been traveling for a while and had not met any girls. And I was very fortunate to have that combination of somebody who spoke English, who was, to be my future wife. We went to the Prado together. We traveled around, and then when I decided I was going to go back to New York, I asked her if she wanted to move in with me, and she said, "Well, no, I'm teaching English in Madrid. I want to stay here and learn Spanish." And so I left, and then about a week later, she called me and said, "Could I take you up on that offer?" She moved into my apartment, and that was that. And we've been together ever since.
All right.
And because we met traveling, they say if you really want to get to know somebody, travel with them. And in fact, probably many relationships break up over traveling. But for us, it brought us together. And so we did a lot of travel. This is a trip I took to New Guinea. And over the years, that's been very much part of our lives and part of, developing my work, like the directions that I have gone in my work. It's really hard to change directions when you're like getting work. You get work, and they don't want you to explore necessarily. When they hire you for a job, they have expectations of what you're going to do, what style you're going to work in. I'm always trying to be open to how I might change with the environment I'm in. And so drawing in my sketchbook has been extremely important for that. And the travels that I've done have given me the opportunity to just experiment and not worry about money and what I'm going to do. I save up for a trip, go on a trip. These days, the trips I take mostly, I would have probably in a different time been in Madrid with you if you had invited me. But many of my trips are the result of getting invited to teach or to lecture or go to a comic festival or visit a publisher in another country. But that's an opportunity for me to get around the world. Mm-hmm. I also am interested in all the variations of what I can do with comics, and one of them is autobiography. So I was telling stories about my relationships with growing up and losing my virginity, say, bad relationships. I wrote about what happened September 11th. I was in my studio and I could see the smoke rising from my studio at the World Trade Center. Right. And my dream was that I could somehow undo that art could do something and somehow undo it. My daughter at the time was 5, and I found that, trying to end of the day, I had to take a deep breath and try to leave behind my fear and anxiety. But what I found was that I would join her in her work, and we would sit and draw. And this was a way for me to escape from my own sense of things. So art did in fact save me. It didn't change what happened, but that was nice. So as part of the experience of the trip that my father had, the sabbatical, my wife and I decided we wanted to do something similar for our daughter. When I went to Israel when I was 10, I got there, I didn't speak the language. I was dropped into school. They just put me straight into the school and knew that at 10, you'll eventually learn the language. I got beat up a lot. I had a lot of trouble with the teachers. I thought we want to have our daughter to have the same experience. So, which she did. So she spoke no Spanish when we got to, we chose Oaxaca just kind of randomly. And I thought this is going to be an opportunity. This is in 2006. Our daughter was 9 at the time. George W. Bush was president. I wanted to escape from him. This was, we were in these wars. I wanted to break from politics. I wanted to do drawings like this that were more, something lighter, more upbeat. We chose this beautiful little quiet town of Oaxaca. And, but, my problem is that because of, that movie, I'm always thinking about the nuclear bomb. So I'm sitting on the beach. I can't help myself. I'm still thinking about that. That's just sort of in the background. It also happened that this town of Oaxaca, this sleepy little town, was having a teacher's strike, which blew up when an American journalist was killed. About 20 people, Mexicans had been killed, but when an North American had been killed, then suddenly it was an international event, and they brought in the police. Somebody wrote asesinos on the ground, two women, and the bravery of these people, and we got to witness it. So I realized I didn't want to not draw politics. I just was sick and tired of American politics. So I drew the politics of that America. And this was what Oaxaca was like for the first 6-8 months that we were there. And very different from New York City. Our buses run slowly, but not this slowly. So I drew these things, and then in a strange turn, I was able to get these things published and get them out in the world in a way that do some kind of journalism that, and then people were interviewing me as an American kind of journal artist. I met a publisher in Mexico City, and he asked me if I wanted to do a book, and so I ended up creating this book that was about the 2 years that we lived in Oaxaca. That later was transformed. I transformed that story into a fictional account, which was a couple moving to Oaxaca, and that they're a fictional couple, but it was based on my experiences, and I was able to kind of place them in directly inside of the events, so that I put them right in the middle of the strike, right in the middle of things happening. Also, when we lived there, my daughter and I raised monarch butterflies, and we went to Morelia, where all the millions of monarch butterflies come. And as I mentioned, my first love was entomology. I wanted to study insects. And so through this work, I can go back to studying insects. So I tracked the idea of the monarch butterfly and in its trip heading across New Jersey, across Summit, New Jersey, on its way through Pennsylvania, past 3 Mile Island, making its way through West Virginia. There's my rough sketch, my tighter sketch. There's the ink drawing. And then I digitally colored it. So that's part of the process with something like this. The other work that I did was with watercolor and colored pencil, very much like my sketchbook. The same Mexican publisher, Sexto Piso, asked me to do my Diario de Nueva York, and later El Sistema. This is how I do a stencil. Gracias para comprarlo. And so I do a pencil drawing. I did this originally, El Sistema para Vertigo. I did that in 1995 as a comic, and then later as a book. So I do the drawing in pencil. I enlarge it. I cut a stencil. That's cut paper, a cut photocopy paper. It's enlarged photocopy, cut with an X-Acto knife. And then I spray it with spray paint in red, and then without them moving the stencil, in black. And that's why I get that beautiful thing. You don't know what you're going to get until you lift up the piece of paper. I love that process. Uh-huh. It's sprayed on watercolor paper, and then I added watercolor and a little colored pencil. All right. For me, this is a perfect meeting between my illustration world and my comics world to do something like this. Uh-huh. And that it was a way to bring those worlds together. Mm-hmm. Sexto Piso also asked me if I wanted to illustrate Alicia en el País de las Maravillas and A Través de Espejo, which was a great opportunity, a book I loved. I got to use a little political imagery there with Richard Nixon, the old president of Watergate, as the Cheshire Cat, and use my daughter to play Alice. I'm also interested in adaptation, and so I did The Jungle back when, but then I love Kafka, so I did an adaptation of Metamorphosis. Most recently with Sexto Piso, I have this book, and also published in Spain, Kafkiana, which is 14 Kafka short stories. I love his work. He perfectly mirrors what's going on today, and it's a way to talk about that through these comics. The next book that Sexto Piso will publish is Heart of Darkness, and my adaptation of Joseph Conrad's very itchy book. And I tried to find my way through this difficult text, which also in many ways talks about the madness of colonialism in our current events. And there's just a spread from the book. And this, again, like my style is continuously changing because I want it to reflect the work. Whatever I'm drawing, I feel like the material should dictate the style. It shouldn't be like, oh, well, this is my style, so I'm going to draw this one way all the time. So this book suggested kind of more like a journal. Like Joseph Conrad kept a book called the Upriver Journal, which I had the good fortune. I taught at Harvard University, and I connected with the library there, and they let me take a look at the actual journals that were created by Joseph Conrad.
All right.
And it was remarkable. So I can't avoid talking about current events, connecting to our absolutely surreal, curiouser circumstance. So they've added a fifth horseman to the apocalypse with the orange payaso. So don't stare directly into the eclipse because it can cause blind rage. So this is the only wall I expect Mexico to actually build. I hope they will build it soon. There's that nuclear bomb. I just can't help. I cannot help doing. We are not done with our October surprise. Who knows what Trump and his people have up their sleeve to win this election, because they won't win it legitimately, but that doesn't mean we won't end up with this mad king as president. And we're in these very incredibly intense times where the Black Lives Matter movement, which is nothing new in this country, we're a very racist country, and we have the luxury as white people to forget that periodically, but it reared its head again with the events with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and it's just a reminder of what's always been there, but the reaction has been phenomenal. And of course, we have a president who is talking about this as being like, these are anarchists and all they want to do is hurt the police, which is insanity. And then we have this pandemic, which is why we're on a Zoom call right now instead of seeing each other in person. And this is my 1 million minutes BC. That BC stands for before coronavirus. And what we used to do, which is we could hug and we could get food and have our hair cut and go to restaurants and sporting events that I personally don't attend, but I'm sure people like that. And it's because we never imagined being hit by something like the dinosaurs were hit by.
Right.
So there's the my variation of Dr. Seuss, and all the people. We're having this culture war over wearing masks. I don't know if you have that same experience exactly in Spain, but we're in this insane line where people want to consider that to be how they put their foot down and should prove that they're not going to be pushed around by science. And so we have this final moment now where we're coming up on this election where Trump is got installed somebody to cheat in the mail-in voting, suggesting that there's fraudulent voting, which there is none. There might be a 0.001% of this, but they talk about it like it's a constant. It just doesn't happen, but that won't stop them from using that as an excuse to undermine our elections. So there's a lot of people standing up for this, and I don't always want to draw the worst things. I like to think about drawing the way I'd like to see things, the way I wish that art could stand up and break the sword of war, so that we can get to the other side of this constant violence, and perhaps get healthcare for everybody here. This notion of socialized medicine, like that's a criminal idea. It's just insane that we're the wealthiest country in the world, and we're all fighting to get healthcare.
Right.
So this is the drum that I'm beating, and that I know that there's millions of people around the world who are beating the same drum. So I don't feel alone that way. And it's one of the things that I try to use my art to do, is to connect with people, so that, and maybe give them a laugh through some cartoons in the New Yorker, or just what I post online. And that, so people don't feel that they're alone. A lot of times I've heard these people say, with magazines like World War III, oh, you're just preaching to the converted. Well, nobody's born political. Nobody's born racist. These are the things that we learn. I learned about the world through Mad Magazine and through everything I saw and read, and the art that I looked at, and the lessons that I got from experience. So this is not, it's an idiotic thing to say that we're already preformed, like we jump out. I mean, I guess the same people say that, you're born in sin. I'm not a believer in that. So this is something I saw on the wall in Oaxaca. La revolución no será televisada. Creo que también, pero la revolución será ilustrada. And here's the latest cover from the latest issue done by Jose Munoz, who is one of my heroes also in art. And I asked him if he would send us some work, and it became the cover to our magazine. So now what we're thinking about is rather than what's wrong, where we're thinking about the world we want to fight for. And so this is available now through AK Press as an ebook, so you can get it anywhere around the world. And that's my story, and now I will stop screen sharing.
Oh, it's great. I mean, that was a really great presentation, Peter. And I have learned that, I mean, there has been a great influence of Spain and Spanish-speaking countries in your lives, right? You met your wife.
Mi español no es suficiente para decir toda la información, pero me gusta muchísimo la oportunidad para visitar a España o México o Sudamérica y practicar con la gente ahí en español, y es como un secreto, y también es más oportunidad para un discurso, compartir nuestro trabajo. Y,
claro.
Yeah.
Y incluso también en el aspecto profesional, ¿no? Porque Sergio Aragonés, ¿no? José Muñoz, ¿no? Sexto Piso.
Sí, la verdad. No, practicamos en español con Muñoz o Sergio. Hablamos en español a veces. Es nuestro secreto en una cena con Matt. Podemos hablar en español.
Okay.
Y también hay festivales en América Latina que puedo, o tengo clases. Soy un maestro en Nueva York, también en Harvard, pero también a veces hay clases, lecturas en español en DF. Por ejemplo, otra vez, mi español no es tan perfecto, pero es oportunidad para luchar de la dirección de comunicación.
Claro. O sea que enseñas también en español, a veces.
Sí.
Ah, qué bien, qué interesante. Sí. Bueno, okay, we have a couple of questions in English.
Por favor, gracias.
From our audience, right? Okay. And first one says, Mr. Kuper, very many thanks for your stunning presentation, and even more so for your magnificent work. It really proves that comic art does serve to grasp and to understand reality. Yet, as current events get more and more surreal, where do you think comic art will turn to apprehend that feeling of reality becoming more and more insane?
I mean, I think in a lot of ways, Picasso said that art is the lie that allows us to understand the truth. That in many ways, especially in a post-fact world, as my unfortunate president has been promoting, and now you have people like Bolsonaro and many insane leaders around the world who take advantage of this idea, that I think that the art is a way for people to actually understand what's going on, because it's a way to cut through the bullshit that unfortunately is constantly there. They're constantly trying to put out this idea that there is no real reality. There's only, everything is subjective, and you know, that it's impossible to know the truth. I find a lot of truth in art, and I turn towards artists like Joe Sacco, for example, who's doing incredible work. Paying for the Land is his most recent book, but you know, he's been digging in with this kind of work, and there's a lot of artists who are doing that type of thing. And I think I very often turn towards cartoons to let me know what's actually going on. So I think, and thanks to things like Instagram and that places where people are able to just put the work up without there being a medium between you and the work, say, you know, that there's not an editor telling you like, you can't say this, you can't put that out there. I'm seeing lots of work like this. One of the other things that I do every week, I work with The Nation magazine, which you can find at, you know, thenation.com, with a group called Art, OPPART, and we post 6 days a week. We post political commentary on what's going on in the world from around the world as best we can, but also fine art and cartoons and comics and illustration. And so it's a grouping like that. And this is a way we're trying to have an antidote to what's going on. This isn't going to be the solution alone. We have to vote these insane people out. And I'm afraid probably what's coming soon is that we're going to have to be taking to the streets in order to push them out, because as we know in this country, a peaceful transition is not necessarily going to be happening.
Right. Well, hopefully, by the way, yes or no, do you see a real chance that Trump will win the elections again?
I don't believe that he will win any more than he won the last time. That was the Electoral College that installed him. He lost by 3 million votes in the last election. He lost the popular vote. So in this country already, we've had more, voting in advance than we've ever had, like in our history, I believe. And
right.
Millions of people have voted. Those people are not voting for Trump. I'm going to guess. I would say probably already he's lost, but that doesn't mean that they won't steal the election through the Electoral College, through cheating, or in fact, in general, like making sure that votes aren't counted. They've thrown out hundreds of thousands of votes. This is all part of their process. The Republican Party in this country is doing everything it can to make it difficult to vote. Exactly what you're not supposed to have in a democracy. That's what they represent. The fact that they're installing a Supreme Court judge right now, as we are already voting, that they swore they would never do. They're doing that right now because they are afraid that it'll come down to the Supreme Court deciding who has the election, and this is their way of securing that. So it's an uphill battle for us to get rid of Trump. But I believe that the numbers will be so extreme that he'll have to take it by force. And one of the things that the Black Lives Matter movement has shown is that people are willing to get out into the streets in very large numbers against all odds, and even with COVID and everything that's going on, they're out there safely, actually. And that I think that that's going to be the response in this country if Trump steals the election.
All right. Very quickly, Peter, because we are running out of time and there is another session at 6 here. I think it's 12 in New York. Another person says, "Thank you, Peter. Your presentation was fantastic." Okay, exclamation mark. Okay, I really enjoyed your Diario de Oaxaca as a piece of graphic journalism, but also as a travel book. Very respectful with Mexican culture. Do you think that being a frequent traveler has helped you to describe and approach other cultures?
100%. I mean, living in Israel for that first year, learning a different language, seeing the United States from the outside, and getting, recognizing that there's a world out there. I think it's something like 5% of Americans have passports, which is pitiful. I feel incredibly fortunate to have been able to know about traveling, figure out how to do it financially and otherwise. I'm sorry about the giant carbon footprint I've left from all my travels because I don't sail where I go. But that said, it's hugely important to my work on all levels to have traveled, to see these places, to recognize these cultures. My love of Mexico, of the Spanish world in general, the Latin world is so huge because I've been so embraced really everywhere I've gone. My experience has only been in Africa, in Egypt, and I loved Cairo. I'm also very fortunate to have gone to many places when it was possible to go there, where now it's impossible or less safe in many ways because of all the trouble that the United States has caused by waging wars. But that even considering how horribly my country has treated many countries in the world, when I've gotten there as an American, I found that I've only been a North American. I've only been treated well and embraced. And even though I arrive apologizing sometimes for the horrific actions of my government, no one has ever treated it that way. And I think, I wish upon everyone to see more countries so that we recognize, instead of all this nationalism that's going on, that people will recognize that it's a one planet that we share, and it's ludicrous, it's idiotic to think that somehow what happens in Brazil is not going to affect us here. Right now, we have these fires in California and Colorado. That smoke it's going all over. When Fukushima exploded, the radiation that goes around the world. So it's impossible to, these ideas that people have that they're somehow the border of a country is in any way stopping, has any impact on whether, our water will be clean, but yours won't. It's idiotic. So yes, is the short answer. And I would not be doing what I'm doing without that experience.
You're welcome to Spain. You're welcome to Comics in Dialogue in the next edition. It's been great to have you with us. And unfortunately, we have to go because the next session should have started 3 minutes ago.
I'll just say two more things, which is you'd asked me what some graphic novels. One I'll mention is David Mazzucchelli's Asterios Polyp is pure genius, and it's one I revisit all the time. In more contemporary terms, Emil Ferris, who did My Favorite Thing Is Monsters, is incredible work. And Julian Tamaki is another brilliant young new artist. I could go on and on and on about art, incredible work, because I mentioned Joe Sacco. There's lots and lots of work to find, and there's so many international artists working. I still turn to Munoz and Sampaio and all that work. But anyway, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for anybody for attending. And I look forward to seeing you all in person one of these days.
Me too. Us too. Okay. Thanks very much, and thanks for reminding me about all these authors that I talked to you about. We had the chance to meet Ferris in person. It was also great. Okay, and hopefully, as you say, someday we'll meet in person and continue our talk.
Hasta pronto.
Hasta muy pronto. Hasta luego.